Hey Hylians! Breath of the Wild is a very special game. It's hard to believe that it's already been 5 years since it was released. And in that time, well, I think it became something more than any of us really imagined. Especially with its DLC, a prequel-style Warriors game, and very soon, a direct sequel. After years of following the same formulas, Breath of the Wild was a pretty big risk. It changed up a lot of what long-term fans of the series had come to know and love, and while it may not be perfect to everyone, it's safe to say that it didn't fail in what it set out to do. So today, on the 5th anniversary of this wonderful game, I want to take a look back at it and simply talk about it with all of you. So get comfy, and if you're new around here, why not consider subscribing so you don't miss more Zelda content from myself. And with all of that said and done, let's take a look back at The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 5 years later. Before jumping right into the game itself, let's take a little look at the time before it. For a good while before Breath of the Wild was even announced or shown, rumours about an open-world Zelda game for the Wii U had been going around for quite a while. Our first look at the game came in 2014, with an impressive and memorable trailer shown off at E3 that year. It was amazing to see this game for the first time. It looked so beautiful. All of the little details in the grass, the clouds, the people working in the fields and the animals close by, it looked like a living world. And then looking back and seeing those mountains and hills and hearing Aonuma say that everything we could see could be reached, the thoughts of what I had about this game were crazy. And then, our first look at a Guardian. We've had robotic monsters in the series before, now and then, but nothing so big and seemingly destructive. And then seeing the chase between it and Link as they run through these old ruins, it was perfect. And everything shown just kept adding to the ideas of what this game could be about. It was a pretty short trailer, but boy did it set us hungry fans into a frenzy. Oh, and there was also a lot of talk about Link in this trailer. Or Linkle? It's funny to look back on now, but at the time, a pretty large group of people thought that this Link was going to be a woman. Something that was eventually shot down by Nintendo, but maybe helped influence Linkle later seen in the Hyrule Warriors DLC. This was also the start of Breath of the Wild's notorious delays. This trailer gave us the release window of 2015, but as we all know, that never came to be, and it took much longer till we could get this game in our hands. It wasn't too much longer though that we got another look at the game, this time actual gameplay, at the 2014 Game Awards. Like I said, this was our first look at actual gameplay of the game. We got to see Miyamoto and Aonuma playing the game, showing off areas and combat. This was our first time seeing the map of the world, and even now I don't think at the time we realised just how big this version of Hyrule would have been. Key parts of gameplay like the horseback combat and the paraglider, at the time shown as the sailcloth from Skyward Sword, were shown off, and things like hunting and foraging for food and materials were hinted at. And once again, that 2015 release date was oh so confidently confirmed. Pretty funny looking back on. After the Game Awards, it went pretty silent with Breath of the Wild news. We eventually found out about the delays, but nothing else was really shown to us. That was until E3 2016.
Open your eyes.
This was our first look at Breath of the Wild in so long, and it was breathtaking. It was also the reveal of the game's name. It was our first time seeing more than grassy fields and forests. We were shown deserts, ruins, lakes. We could actually see those mountains that we were told that we could get to. And how would we be getting up those mountains? Climbing. This was our first look at climbing, something that became a huge part of getting around Hyrule in the final game. I love looking back at this trailer. It shows so much of what we could expect from the game, even the hint at voice acting, and a little of the game's beautiful music. This trailer really captures the vibes of Breath of the Wild for me. It wasn't trying to be a trailer showing off a big, epic adventure. It was trying to be a trailer showing a big, beautiful open world, and all the things that we could do within it, only hinting a little at the story of the game. But eventually we would get that big, epic adventure-style trailer. A trailer that I personally feel is one of the best video game trailers of all time. It was January 2017, a couple of months before the release of Breath of the Wild, and Nintendo, within their big Switch presentation, gave us another big look at the game. And when I say big, I mean huge. Starting off with the same kind of beautiful shots we saw in the E3 trailer, then beautiful sweeping shots of Link traversing these landscapes, and then voice acting? We got a little hint at this before, but now it was certain that this was not just for the trailer, as multiple characters were talking. This would be the first Zelda game with voice acting. If you're a fan who started with Breath of the Wild, you might not realise just how big this was for a lot of us who had been with the series for a long time. Voice acting was always something discussed between fans for the series. Plenty of other games had it by now, but it was also something that felt kind of like it may never happen for the Zelda series. And here it was. And it sounded pretty darn good. This was our big, epic story trailer, showing off not only the beautiful world, but what we could expect from the game's story. Calamity Ganon, the champions, and of course, Zelda. Seeing Link and Zelda interacting, seemingly talking and adventuring together was so exciting. And we can't forget that crying scene, something that hit all of us in the chest seeing it for the first time. This trailer really had it all, and even now looking back on it, I get so excited. It really was the perfect way to end this extremely long wait, as it would only be a couple more months till we finally got to play this game. Well, although Breath of the Wild came out in March 2017, that wasn't my first experience with the game. I was lucky enough to, shortly after the Nintendo Switch presentation, go to a special Switch event in London and play a bunch of upcoming games, one of those being Breath of the Wild. And yes, although this was a time-limited demo, I was very emotional playing it. I had waited years for this game, following all of the information I could, to finally be able to play it, even a small snippet of the game. Well, I was so happy, and I had to try not to cry. I didn't do very well at that. I actually have a video of this on my channel, and while the quality and the sound isn't the best, having that moment to look back on is really nice. But anyway, let's finally get onto the game itself. The game begins with Link waking up in a cave. This is the Shrine of Resurrection. Quite the change to Link's normal sleeping spots. It's here, after waking up, where we get some simple armor and the main item for this game, the Sheikah Slate. The Sheikah Slate may just be the most involved key item to date in the series, being used as a map, a camera, and the way we use our runes, which I'll talk about shortly. Exiting the cave, we get a beautiful and memorable shot of the world, showing just how far off we can go. But not right away. First, we get a tutorial. And honestly, this might be one of my favourite tutorials in any game, mainly because it doesn't really feel like one. This is because, instead of being guided place to place within a small town or area, we have the entirety of the Great Plateau to explore. A pretty big area to start in, and everything works so well together to make this tutorial area. There is essentially a little bit of everything that you can come to expect within the game on the Great Plateau. From normal monsters with different types of weapons and different strength, to an overworld boss monster, changes in temperature, different weapons and armor, cliffs to climb, things to cook and even special recipes with special effects, and even the Koroks show up here, letting you get started right away on the game's main collection quest. Seriously, I think every main challenge that you will come across in the game is explored a little on the Great Plateau, to give you an understanding of how to deal with it later. And it works so perfectly. There are some hints on how to do certain things, but for the most part, it's all worked out by yourself and your own experimenting. Along with all of this though, is probably the most important part of the tutorial: the shrines. Shrines are found all over Hyrule, and are pretty much mini dungeons, with different puzzles to solve or monsters to fight. Solving them will reward you with a spirit orb, which is later used to expand your health or stamina. On the Great Plateau there are 4 of these shrines, and we need to do all of them before we can leave. The first reason is that the old man found here, later revealed to be the King of Hyrule, has asked for us to get these spirit orbs. And the second is that each of the 4 shrines has an ability within it essential to exploring Hyrule. The runes are Cryonis, the ability to create pillars of ice; Stasis, the ability to stop time on a moving object or enemy; Magnesis, the ability to pick up and move metallic objects; and Bombs. Pretty self-explanatory for that one. The best thing about all of this is once you have all of these runes, you then have everything you need to go out and explore Hyrule. There are very few locations in the world that you can't overcome in some way with these runes. The only ones there may be are ones surrounding certain story points. The shrines you get each rune within also act as a quick condensed tutorial on the basics of each rune. Like the Great Plateau, giving you the basic information but letting you work out later on all the different ways it can be used. Like I've said already, I feel the Great Plateau is honestly the perfect tutorial. It lets you get to grips with almost everything you'll be using throughout the game, and doesn't do it in a handholdy way. Even if the rest of the game was open world, it would have been super easy to have the old man be a tutorial character teaching us everything and not letting us discover it by ourselves. I really love how Nintendo did the Great Plateau. When I first got the game, I think I spent my whole first day on the Great Plateau, finding all of the Koroks I could, all the weapons hidden around the area, just going after all of the little extra bits hidden around, because this place didn't feel like a tutorial, it felt like a tiny cutout of the world, which I guess it kind of was. Zelda stories are something I am always excited to experience for the first time when getting a new game in the series. They are always full of so many wonderful characters and moments and are just great in my eyes. It's no understatement when I say just how excited I was for the story of Breath of the Wild. After all of those years of waiting, I'd come up with quite a lot of ideas on what this game's story could be, and as more of the game was revealed and we finally got to look at more of what this game had in store for us, those story ideas just grew and grew. Breath of the Wild, out of all of the other Zelda games, I feel has the most unique story at this point in time. Partly because of what the story is about, but also because of the way it's told. Because Breath of the Wild is an open world game, Nintendo clearly wanted the story not to get in the way of people's enjoyment and exploration of the world, so this drastically changed the way the story was told. Unlike other Zelda games before it, Breath of the Wild's story is non-linear, and can be experienced really in any order. Apart from the beginning and the ending, everything else is up to you to find and experience. And when I say find, I literally mean find. The story is told mainly through memories. These memories are connected to images taken at points around the world, and finding the points that they were taken will let you experience a memory from 100 years ago, connected to that location. You see, the main story of Breath of the Wild took place 100 years ago. At this time, Link, Zelda, and the champions Mipha, Daruk, Urbosa, and Revali were all around preparing for the return of Calamity Ganon, and Zelda was trying to awaken her goddess powers. But in the end, they failed. Ganon awoke and destroyed much of the kingdom. The champions all died and their spirits became trapped within the divine beast that they piloted. And Link, well, he also died after fighting to protect Zelda. The only way we are back at the start of the game was because Link's body was quickly taken to the Shrine of Resurrection so that he could rest for 100 years in hopes that he would be able to stop the calamity when he awoke after all of that time. But what happened to Zelda? Well, she was able to awaken her powers in an attempt to save Link, and after he was put in the Shrine of Resurrection, she went to fight Ganon all alone. And since then, she's been within Hyrule Castle with Ganon, using her powers to keep him at bay for 100 years. A very different but very epic story for the series, showing the true destruction of what Ganon can do, and the harm to the kingdom and its people he can cause. It's not very often that main Zelda characters also die in a story, so it's definitely a big change on that point. The memories we find show us cutscenes of this time 100 years ago, and slowly show us what happened all that time before, the good and the bad. Little moments between Link and the champions, and many between Link and Zelda, showing the growth of their relationship. It's really nice seeing Link as a part of a pretty tight-knit group, and not just fighters but friends. And Zelda also being included in that group was so lovely to see, as a lot of the time in games she can kind of be pushed off to the side. But with Breath of the Wild being so open, and Nintendo letting us do what we wanted when we wanted, you won't necessarily find the story in the order it takes place at first. The first memory I ended up finding on my first time playing was actually one of the very last. So I have mixed feelings about the execution of the story. I do think it's an interesting way of telling the story in an open world, but I sadly feel that with it being told like this, it lessens the impact of some of these moments. All of the events that we see happened 100 years ago. At the time that we play in, it's all over and we can't change any of that. There are story moments that happen in the current time around the new champions, but none of that really stands up to the story from 100 years ago for me personally. What happened back then is just much more interesting for me, and our main story of the current time kinda just feels like tying up loose ends from 100 years ago. On repeat playings of the game, I feel all of the interesting things in the story happened that 100 years ago, and I really would have loved to play those moments back then. I said at the start of this segment that I had many ideas on where I thought the story would go from what I had seen in trailers, and from the trailers I always had the idea that we would be playing moments leading up to things like Zelda crying in Link's arms. I can't imagine how much more heartbreaking that would have been to be playing protecting Zelda moments before that scene. But instead, we just find it while exploring, which is cool in its own way, but doesn't have the same emotional impact for me. I understand with Breath of the Wild being such an open game that a big story like those seen in the series before might have been hard to do, but I don't think it would have been impossible, and I really hope someday we can get a big open world Zelda game with a story with the same impact of some of the games that came before it. So let's get on to the main event, the open world itself. Hyrule within Breath of the Wild is huge. It's honestly a little ridiculous just how big this world is, especially when looking at it next to the last big 3D Zelda game, Skyward Sword, which had a world split into multiple segments. As a kid playing Twilight Princess, I used to think that that version of Hyrule was huge, but putting it next to Breath of the Wild, I don't even think it's half the size. And this world is not only big, it is beautiful. There are so many different locations in this game. You have all the different places like forests, lakes, deserts, mountains, volcanoes, but also there are so many little small locations hidden within them. Places like the Zonai ruins hide within the depths of Faron and are amazing to first come across. Walking through the woods and finding these old ruins leading to a huge stone dragon head was so amazing. There are also so many of these tiny places around the world that don't really even count as their own location. They're just pretty or interesting little places around the map. One I always come back to is this broken down guardian close to one of the stables. Unremarkable by itself, but now and then, a small fairy can be found flying around it. It's not there all the time, so when you do find it, it's kinda special. Another is on the high hills surrounding Kakariko Village. At the top of them, you can find some pretty interesting things, like a frog statue and a sword, or on the top of another, a small group of glowing flowers. There are so many places like this all over Hyrule. I've lost count over how many times I've just stopped in the middle of a random location on the map and just watched the world. It really is a game that I get lost in, and even now I'm still finding little places and secrets after multiple times playing the game. I think there may even be a mini game in this game that I have never played simply because I've never found it somehow. There's always the worry with big open games that there won't be anything to do in the world outside of set locations. But luckily, that's something you don't need to worry about with Breath of the Wild. There are a lot of different things to do within this game when exploring the world. You have your normal kind of side quests that you'll have to go all over the world to both complete and find. There are many shrines scattered all over the world that you'll want to find and complete to get your spirit orbs, and other goodies later on in the game. There are a nice handful of minigames spread out around the world, and of course there are also the Koroks, which will have you going around the world looking in the most random little nooks and crannies and picking up every rock in Hyrule just to find. Along with these, there's also things like finding and collecting all the armour around Hyrule, helping the Great Fairies and upgrading your gear with them, collecting all the different materials, finding all the different types of weapons, fighting all of the different types of overworld bosses, finding all the dragons, and also the memories that we talked about before, and so much more. There is seriously so much in this game that you will always have something to work towards. I played for ages before finding out that Kilton could give you special medals for defeating all of the overworld bosses. I think my only problem with the world of this game though is the lack of enemy variety. I've talked about this on my channel before, so if you want a much longer breakdown, I'll leave a link around the video. But basically for me, Breath of the Wild really doesn't have that big of a monster roster to go against. The main things you'll be fighting are Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos. And while I do love these monsters, I don't love fighting them in every location on the map. For me, seeing the Moblins and Bokoblins in the grassy Hyrule fields and then up in the snowy mountains or on Death Mountain just doesn't feel right. Places like Death Mountain, the snowy areas, and the desert could have had their own area-specific monsters, like the Dongos for Death Mountain, Chilfos for the snowy areas, and Levers or Moldorms to go along the Molduga in the desert. But instead, we just get more of the same. Moblins, Bokoblins, Lizalfos, Octoroks, Keese, and Choo-Choos, with sometimes elemental abilities slapped onto them. Even the overworld bosses get a little tiring to see time and time again. There really wasn't any big surprises of coming across a new monster type after playing the game for a decent amount of time, like what you would have in past games, apart from finding the Molduga in the desert. I found the desert late into my time playing, and by that I'd seen all of the other types of monsters, so finding a new one was very exciting for me, and caught me off guard. I always found myself after a while thinking what monsters could work in different parts of the map. And I can't have been the only person a little disappointed going into Hyrule Castle for the first time and just finding more moblins. I was really hoping that for this last area of the game, maybe Nintendo had something special for us, like Dark Nuts or Iron Knuckles, once strong soldiers of Hyrule now corrupted by malice and turned into Dark Nuts to fight and protect Calamity Ganon. But I'll stop myself from going on too long about this. If you're interested on my thoughts on this topic and want to see more of what I have to say and how I think Nintendo could have fixed this, I'll have a link to that video somewhere around this one. A way I've described this game before is that it's a game where you can do everything or nothing. A lot of these side things are just side extras to do and find when exploring around the world. You don't need to do them if you don't want to. Some people might have more fun exploring Hyrule and taking photos of all the animals and monsters, and others might have more fun fighting all of the monsters. So when it comes to running out of things to do within this game, if you do everything within it, it will take you a very long time. And for me, that's a nice big bonus on top of this already fun world to explore. An important part of any Zelda game are the dungeons, the places that really put us to the test. And like much of this game already, things were done a little differently when it comes to the dungeons. There are only 4 main dungeons in this game, 5 if you count Hyrule Castle, though saying you can easily climb your way up and skip everything inside, I personally don't count it as one. You may at first think 4 is a little lacking when it comes to dungeons, and yes, it's definitely on the smaller side, but Majora's Mask also only had 4 dungeons. This small number of dungeons though is made up for by the 120 shrines found around the world. I've already talked a little bit about the shrines already, but they really are an interesting way to do dungeons in this game. Though they're less like traditional dungeons and more like puzzle rooms, as each shrine only really consists of at most 3 rooms. All shrines will be one of 3 types. Shrines where you need to solve a puzzle outside of it and enter for your reward, shrines with puzzles inside, and the battle shrines where you need to fight a mini guardian. Through these 120 shrines, there's a large array of different types of puzzles, ranging in difficulty. Some even play off one another and you'll need to go to both to finish the puzzles. There are so many, you are bound to find some that you love and really enjoy going through. I really quite like the shrines where the puzzle is actually getting into them. I like seeing how the puzzles are worked into the world around them, making us use the area and sometimes even things like the time of day or the weather to open them up. There's a lot of cool ideas being used in the shrines. When it comes to the main dungeons of the game though, the Divine Beasts, I have mixed feelings. While the dungeons are enjoyable, they're not the most memorable. When I think of the Divine Beasts, I think of how they look on the outside, the giant robotic animals roaming around Hyrule, not the dungeons inside of them. And part of this comes from the fact that the dungeons all look very alike. Being large Sheikah technology made creatures, it makes sense that all of them would look the same. But because of this, there really isn't that much telling them apart from each other, except for when you can see outside of them and maybe Rudania with its darkness. The Divine Beasts do have their own theming, like electricity or water, which does set them apart from one another, but off the top of my head, I really could not describe to you how the insides of these beasts look, and how they differentiate from one another, like what I could with dungeons in, say, Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess. The fact that the inside is also all of this brown-grey stone for the most part really doesn't help in making these things look appealing or memorable. I really wish they did do something different with the inside of each of the Divine Beasts, to give them each more personality and to make each more visually memorable from one another, even if it just came to giving each dungeon its own colour like what they did in the original Zelda. But let's move on from designs and actually talk about the puzzles and goals of these dungeons. Within the Divine Beasts, you'll need to activate a number of terminals. and the main puzzles of the dungeon come into play with how we get to those terminals. But getting to the terminals is the main goal for each of the divine beasts, and while the puzzles to get to all of them are different, I really would have liked to see some more variety when it comes to getting the beasts back on our side, or simply more puzzles within the divine beasts outside of just getting to the terminals would have been nice. I think part of the problem with the puzzles also comes to the size of the divine beasts. They're not tiny, but they are compact, and definitely not that big when comparing them to dungeons of past games again. They mainly have a couple of rooms to go between or a couple of different levels to go between, but there's not much more you can do with that small area inside the divine beast. The coolest thing about the dungeons, and my favourite thing about them, is that we have to use the map on our Sheikah slate to move parts of the divine beast to help us with puzzles, like the trunk of Ruta or the inside in the Boris. It's really cool realising you need to move the divine beast in just the right way to be able to open a room or hit a switch. When it comes to combat in these dungeons, there really isn't any. You may have to fight 1 or 2 mini guardians and some cursed monster skulls flying at you, but all are so easy to take down, they're more of an annoyance. The bosses though do not disappoint and are really fun. The only problem with them is once again the design. The boss of each beast is a Ganon Blight, and because they're all blights, they all look pretty similar. It is definitely easier to tell them apart more than the dungeons that they can be found in, but still, because they look so similar, apart from maybe Thunderblight Ganon because it's so much smaller, it is a little disappointing when it comes to their design. Age of Calamity actually fixed this for me by giving each of the blights their own colour. A simple little addition, but I find myself remembering the blights from Age of Calamity more than the ones in Breath of the Wild because of those colours. Anyway, despite the looks of the blights, they are pretty fun fights, each having their own different ways of attacking and being attacked. My personal favourite out of all of them being Thunderblight Ganon, with the super fast way it moves around the area making you really need to pay attention to it to get those dodges and stuns on it. Even now, after fighting it multiple times, I still struggle quite a bit. I also really like Waterblight Ganon, with its use of the trident and the way it hangs from the ceiling of the room you fight it in. It makes it look pretty creepy. Also, the way you fight Fireblight Ganon always makes me smile. The Dongos may not have made it into the game, but the way you fight them was with you, Fireblight Ganon. So, the dungeons of Breath of the Wild have their ups and downs for me. While they are fun and decent puzzle-wise, doing the same types of things over and over does get a little repetitive. Repetitive may even be the best word to describe the Divine Beast, really. The puzzles are pretty alike, the dungeons are pretty alike, and even the bosses are pretty alike. That it can feel a little repetitive. Almost like you're going into the same place over and over with only a little change. And that's coming from me. I like the Temple of the Ocean King. I may be being a little harsh on the dungeons of this game, but with how little there are and the similarity between them, it's just a little sad that in the end they didn't become all that memorable for me like ones of past games. Still, I wouldn't say that they're bad. Not at all. They just have problems that maybe hit me a little harder than others because of how much I look forward to the dungeons. I said at the start of this video that when Breath of the Wild came out, I don't think anyone really knew just how big this game would become. Because, well, since its release, we got DLC, a prequel game, and very soon, hopefully if everything goes to plan, a direct sequel. Not many other Zelda games get that kind of treatment, especially so fast. Breath of the Wild got 2 sets of DLC, adding a bunch of new content in June and December of the same year it came out. The Master Trials, the first of the DLC sets, added in new costumes like Majora's Mask, the Phantom's armor, and Tingle's outfit, along with the hero's path, showing you where you had gone on the map, the Trial of the Sword, a new dungeon crawl-like mode where you had to make your way through many different levels of increasing difficulty to eventually power up your Master Sword, and the Master Mode, making the game far more difficult with moving up every enemy a level in difficulty, and even adding a new level of difficulty in the form of gold monsters. For the first of the DLC packs, this was a lot of great new content. A lot of us had been waiting for the Master Mode since the game first came out, and while it would have been nice to have it in the base game, getting it in the end is still really great. I love all the new costumes added in the DLC. The Korok mask is so helpful when trying to find all those pesky little Koroks. And if you've been around here a while, you know how much I love Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, so seeing them add in the Phantom armor from Spirit Tracks made me so excited. The Trial of the Sword was also another great addition, and was surprisingly difficult. It didn't just focus on killing enemies, but actually made fighting them into puzzles. Like within the lightning rooms, where the lightning could hurt you if you were holding a metal spear or sword, but you needed to use them to fight the enemies. It's a really fun challenge, and I really enjoyed the combination of fighting and puzzle solving that was used in it. The second DLC pack, and I think the one people were more excited for, was the Champion's Ballad. It came with new armor for Link and even his horse, but the main thing for this pack was, well, the Champion's Ballad. A bunch of new quests and shrines, leading to more looks back at the champions, this time with more of a focus on the interactions between them and Zelda. I gotta admit, I was a little sad that we didn't get more than the handful of cutscenes that we ended up getting, or that we didn't get to play in the time where the champions were still alive, but it's still really great. I love seeing Urbosa fight the Yiga to protect Zelda, Mipha and Zelda talking about Link together, Revali showing his determination and will to fight, and of course, Daruk being adorably scared by a dog. Getting a little bit more time with these characters, even if it was just in memories, was really nice, and I really liked seeing how they interacted with Zelda compared to how they acted with Link. Like I said, this DLC set came with a bunch of new quests and shrines, which lead to the new content with the champions. These new shrines are super fun and sometimes pretty challenging, but nothing too different from the other shrines in the game. After finishing all the shrines related to each champion, you get put in a rematch with each of the Blights, this time with limited items and weapons, the weapons used by the champions. And after defeating the Blights again, the abilities you get from each of the champions will be upgraded, reducing the amount of time it takes for them to recharge. Honestly, a pretty small reward, I feel, but the reward was not really what made me excited for this DLC. Having the reduced time on Revali's Gale though is super nice. I forgot to mention this, but when starting the Champion's Ballad, you also have this kind of stealth mission on the Great Plateau. You are given a weapon that kills enemies in one hit, but makes it so they can kill you in one hit as well. Meaning you need to really sneak around and be careful not to get hit by them. I really liked this part of the DLC. Going back to the location the story started in, this time with all the knowledge we had from our time playing, and putting us against this challenge was super fun. After completing the new shrines and getting your champion abilities upgraded, there is still one more thing you need to do. It turns out, hiding under the Great Plateau all this time was another divine beast. And so, at the end of all of this, we are given an all-new dungeon. Now, sadly, it does keep the same kind of design look of the other dungeons in the game, but this is my favourite dungeon in the game. It has parts reflecting each of the puzzles found within the other divine beasts, but they just feel better to me, like something about the dungeon is paced differently or laid out differently. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is that makes me enjoy this dungeon more than the divine beasts, but I just do. It is kinda sad though that this dungeon is part of DLC and not part of the base game though, because it is so good. And what turns this dungeon from good to great is its boss. We do not go against another Blight and get something completely different this time. This time we have to fight a Sheikah Shrine monk, and it's awesome. We get placed on a giant floating island in the sky and have to fight this guy as he comes at us with all of the tricks he has. He's not trying to kill us, he's trying to test us and see if we are really worthy of being the hero of Hyrule. This boss is the best in the game. The blights are fun and Ganon's spider form is memorable, but playing this boss fight was definitely the most fun and challenging boss in the game for me, and I loved every moment of it. I would recommend getting the DLC just to play this dungeon and boss because it is so freaking good. After beating the monk, our final challenge of the DLC, we are rewarded with the Master Cycle Zero. Yes, a motorbike. It's still pretty funny and weird to me that this is actually in the game, but at the same time, I don't care, it's great. Riding this thing around Hyrule is stupidly fun. I love messing with the guardians on it, and it really is fast, making it better than your horse at times. My only problem with the bike is because of how you start the Champion's Ballad, you might be doing these quests pretty late into your time playing the game, and by the time you get the bike, you may not have that many side quests and shrines left to do and use your bike to get to. But still, I think it's fun, it's silly, it's a great reward for doing the Champion's Ballad. And that's pretty much it for Breath of the Wild. The big main points, I feel, at least. There's still a lot of stuff this game has in store, but what I've covered I feel are the big main points of this game. I love this game. Even 5 years later, it's still incredibly fun. And even with the problems I have with it, it won't stop me from loving it. There's far too much in Breath of the Wild that I love that even the things that I wish were done differently don't outweigh that stuff I love. This was a game I followed from the first rumours all the way to its release. And it was a wild ride. Pun intended. Through the delays, the new trailers, the fan theories, at times the wait may have been stressful, but in the end it was definitely worth it. And now, currently, we are doing it all over again for the direct sequel of this game. And it's still amazing to me that a sequel even exists. I really hope the problems I have with Breath of the Wild might get fixed or at least improved on in this sequel. I'd really like to see more monsters in the sequel and better dungeons, and of course, a more engaging story. But until then, we just need to wait, and hope that the wait for Breath of the Wild sequel isn't that much longer. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of today's video. It was kind of a spur of the moment video when I realised the 5th anniversary was only a couple of days away. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please give the video a like. It always helps me see that you are enjoying the content that I make. And if you're new around here, why not subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss any of the Zelda content I upload. I'm sure all of you have your own thoughts and opinions on Breath of the Wild, and I would love to hear them, so go and leave your thoughts and experiences with the game down in the comments below. I really look forward to reading them. Thank you all again for watching all the way to the end of today's video. I hope you've all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!